Okay, cool. So my name is Alan, and I'm an artist and I'm a game designer. So thank you so much for the introduction. So my work mostly consists of experimental video games, interactive animations, as well as VR installations. And most of my work focus on the theme of psychological spaces in video games, which I will talk a bit more in a bit. Okay, but before I start, I just want to share two very personal stories of mine, which are kind of related to my artistic practice. Okay, so story number one happened in 2004. So I grew up in Hong Kong. So in 2004, I was in high school in Hong Kong, right? So just to give a bit of context, right now, I work a lot with video games and animation and stuff like that. But then when I was a teenager, I wasn't really so much into the idea of gaming, right? Because the games that I mostly interacted with were mostly really competitive games, shooting games, killing games, racing games, stuff like that. And I think those games really stressed me out. So at that time, I wasn't really so much into the idea of playing games, right? But then I was in high school, right? So after class, I would hang out with some of my friends in this kind of game arcade center in Hong Kong. And then inside this game arcade center, there were different kind of games, Street Fighters, racing games, shooting games, all sort of games, right? And then as I mentioned, I wasn't so much into the idea of actually playing games, but then I was into watching people play games. One of the games that I like watching people play is these sort of the racing arcade games, right? At that time, there were two mainstream kind of racing games. One is Initial D. Second is this kind of game called the Midnight One On, right? And how it works is super simple, right? So you sit on one of these red chairs, and then you just race against the players sitting next to you, right? So it's pretty straightforward and also pretty fun to watch. One afternoon, I was in this game arcade center just watching people play games. And then one teenage couple walk in, probably 16, 17 years old, around the same age as me. And the boy just sit on one of these red chairs, just started driving, right? And then his girlfriend somehow grabbed one of those great color plastic chair from somewhere, and then sat right next to her boyfriend and then just watch him drive. The sitting configuration was kind of funny, right? They were sitting in a way as if they were sitting in a real car, right? But that caught my attention. And then the second interesting thing is when I actually look at the screen of how the boy drive, he was driving super slow. He was just chilling and cruising and stuff like that, right? So he wasn't really competing with the players next to him, right? So what they were doing was basically just cruising in this fortune road of Tokyo and just enjoying the time and just cruising and stuff like that. So I think this story is kind of cool because I think this is one of the most romantic and beautiful moments that I've seen in a game arcade center. And the second thing is as an artist, looking back, this actually shows a lot of possibilities of video game, beyond competitive systems and beyond solving puzzles and killing and shooting people. There's a lot that we can do with video games, with interactive virtual world that's beyond just competitive system and puzzle solving. And there's a lot that we can do that's poetic and interesting and beautiful with video games and animations. So, but I was still a teenager, right? So the story didn't unfold in a way that I started making games the next morning and stuff like that. It took much longer than that. But then I'd like to share about this story before I talk about my works, because I think as an artist, looking back, there's some sort of subconscious connection between the works that I make right now and this very personal story of mine. Okay, so fast forward to 2011. At that time, I was during my final years at School of Creative Media, so I was working on my thesis project. And this was also the year that I made my first art game. So for that project, I didn't start it out I want to make a game and stuff like that, right? So I started out doing this kind of weird thing that I have a video camera, a small video camera on my glasses. So it's a video camera that captures both video and audio. I was basically kind of doing a live vlogging project. I used this video camera to capture everything from my first person perspective. No matter I was having lunch with my friends, spending time with my family, or in classes, all of those moments were being captured. As a result, I have this pretty huge database of video memories. And then I was trying to figure out now I have this database of video memories, virtual memories, and what should I do with it, right? One of my earliest ideas was pretty straightforward. So I was thinking about, oh, maybe I should build a search system, right? Search people, GPS. So I can build a perfect memory system, right? For example, I lost my key last night, and then I can just search the video of like last night and then figure out like where I lost my key, right? And then maybe I can build like a system that enable myself not to forget about things, stuff like that. So that was like a pretty like straightforward, like kind of like a more like sciencey like approach. But then like I was talking to my thesis advisor, like Professor Yok at that time, like Yale, and then we have like a few like discussions, stuff like that. And then as an artist, like I always wanted to build something like a bit more like weird and interesting, right? So that we got to this idea of like, what if like I put all this like virtual memories, right? This huge library of like virtual memories inside kind of like an interactive like 3D landscape as a video game for people to like play through, right? So it's kind of like an interactive experience that as if like you can jump inside my mind and kind of like walk around and browse my memories and like stuff like that. Okay, so this ended up becoming like a project called like Bad Trip, which was produced like almost like 11 years ago, a long time ago. So like this project basically became kind of like an immersive like video game installation. Okay, so like it's a dark room, people like got in, grabbed like an Xbox controller and started like navigating like this world, right? So it sounds like kind of abstract, right? So I'm just going to give like a very basic like an explanation of how it works, right? So it's kind of like a surreal, like virtual, like 3D landscape that is like interactive, right? So this is like an artistic rendering of like what I think like my mind like can be, and then you can like walk inside this world using a controller, and then you can like encounter different sort of houses, right? There are like a lot of different houses in this virtual world, and then each set of like houses store like a specific set of like my virtual memories. For example, like this house, like store the memories of like me and one of like my ex-girlfriend. So like when you like go inside, right? If you like walk up the stairs and you actually see like a cluster of like boxes, right? And then once you go inside this like cluster of boxes, like you start seeing like all this like memories of like me and her, like all the videos like from my camera, right? So like in this house you can find like all the moments of me like with her, stuff like that. So this is like how it works. Like in this world, there are like all sort of like different houses, and each house like storing different memories. So it gives you like this experience of like jumping into my mind, like navigating my mind, and like this sort of stuff. This is like a pretty like early projects, but then I guess like this like started like my exploration into like building this sort of like intimate psychological memory spaces in video games. And I'm like very interested in like this theme, like because I think as like a player of like video games, I think that for like contemporary like mainstream video games, like no matter we're talking about like shooting games, like racing games, and like fighting games, stuff like that, like most of those games are all about simulating a Newtonian physics, right? It's all about like simulating the physics of the external reality. It's like simulating how bullets fly in the air, how like cars like physically behave on the road, stuff like that. It's all about the physics of the outside world, right? But as an artist, like what I'm more interested in is like the physics within our minds. So instead of like the physics of external reality, I'm more interested in exploring the physics within our minds. Like the physics of like how memories interact with like fantasies and dreams, and how I could explore those spaces in like a virtual world like setting. So I think like this started like my journey looking into this theme and like make more like animations and games afterwards. And I guess like this project also like brought me into like some like exhibitions overseas and stuff like that. So that actually opened me some doors into more like international exposure and stuff like that. Before this project, like I had no idea about like 3D animations and interactive programming and stuff like that. So like for that, like I was actually sitting in like Professor Tamash's class about like interactive animation, where I learned a lot about like 3D modeling and like interactive programming for like virtual world and stuff like that. And I think like for that course, I wasn't like officially like a student in that class, but I was just like sitting in. And I think like looking back, I think that class helped to pivot like my practice from like a student filmmaker, like a video artist, into like an artist that's like more like interactive animations, like experimental 3D and stuff like that. So I think like that's like a really cool experience and stuff like that. So story number 2 happened when I was much like a younger kid. So I was like more like 7, like 8 years old, just like a little kid. That story happened when like during like Easter time. I was like a little kid, and then like my parents like brought me to like a hotel to have like a dinner buffet during Easter. Okay, and then I was like pretty excited, and then like having like dinner and stuff like that. And then like on the table like right next to us, it was also like a small family, right? Like a kid and also his like parents. The kid was like crying like for all the night, right? He was like always crying, and then what he was trying to do was like he was like begging his mom to order him like a glass of orange juice, right? Because in like a hotel, like for like juices and stuff, like oftentimes like you have to order like extra, and it's like pretty expensive, stuff like that. So his mom like refused to do so because like his mom thought that like, oh, it's a pretty overpriced and it's not a good deal. So the boy was like keep like crying and stuff like that. But then like what happened like afterwards was that it's like pretty interesting. So the boy like ran out to like the dinner, like the table areas, and then on this kind of like the buffet tables, like there were like these sort of like tall like glass like jars, like transparent like glass jars with like all the apples and oranges and bananas like inside, all just for like aesthetics, right? Just for like the visuals and like a decorative purpose. So the boy like climbed up to like the buffet tables and like grabbed like an orange like from the glass jars, and then like went back to his table and just like used his bare hands to like squeeze like a glass of orange juice like for himself. Right? So it's like a pretty cool like experience like for me. First thing I think is like cool because like it shows like the spirit of like being like a rebel, right? And then like the second thing is like it showed like this like really kind of like a DIY spirit, right? Like you have to build your own thing. And I guess like very oftentimes like when environments or like the people around you like refuse to give you what you want, like you have to invent it. And you have to make the thing that's like better than like the original version of like the item, right? And I think as like a media artist working with like games and animations, like very often I think it's cool to like build like custom tools and softwares to achieve like your own aesthetics and also like your own like interaction like models and stuff like that. And I think it's this like core element of like DIY spirit that like motivate me to like after SCM like I went to Boston to do like grad school at MIT, where I encountered like a lot of like really weird and like cool projects. This is like one of like the fun project that like one of like the MIT undergrad like did. So he basically like got like a shopping cart from the supermarket, and then like he installed like the wheels and then like the motors and the batteries, and then he turned it into like a drivable like cart. And that was like pretty fun. And then like this is like one of like the video that he was driving this around campus. Yeah, so I guess like you got the idea. So the thing that I like about this sort of like fun project is that this is not like an art performance. This is not like an art installation. It's not a startup. It's not like a big invention, but it's just like a fun project, right? So the thing that I like about MIT is that like people just like keep building things, like no matter it's like art or engineering, like we don't have to define those things. And then sometimes when you work on like art projects, like when we are like really into it, when we're really passionate about it, some sort of like technical innovation like might emerge, right? And then sometimes when we work on like engineering project, like when we're into it, some sort of like poetry or like sense of like beauty might also emerge as well. So I think like I really enjoyed this kind of spirit that we just enjoy making things and then something beautiful would happen, right? So for one of like the dorms at MIT, they built like a full-size like functional roller coaster just to attract like freshmen to like join the dorms. So they build it like using like really basic like wood pieces and like basic tools, stuff like that. So before they build it, like they have to make like 3D plans, stuff like that, to submit like for like the city government like approval for safety. This is like one of like the early plans. They have like a 360 loop, which obviously is like pretty like dangerous. Like someone could like fall from the loop, right? So they got rejected. So they have to make like a more simple version. So this is like the final version. And then after like they get approved, like they make like the real thing. So they use like wood pieces, stuff like that, just to like build it like day and night, okay? And they use like dummies to like test it. And they afterwards they use like real people to test it. Things that I like about MIT is like this like really kind of like underground like punk like spirit that like people just like keep building stuff, like no matter it's like art or engineering or it's just for fun, right? Sometimes like we do things for fun and it happens to be like a great thing. And I think like that kind of spirit like inspired me a lot to like keep on and like made me to like make like further like games and like animations and like making like flying robots for like flying umbrellas for one and stuff like that. So I guess like these are like some of like the things that I've like experienced. And I guess like I don't want to like go like too deep into like any of like those projects. I much more like prefer just to talk about like my motivations, like my thought processes and like things like that. For now, like I want to talk a bit about ideas that I've been working on. I've been working on this idea of like immersive theater with like mixed reality. Just to give a bit of like context. So for my artistic practice, like I mostly work with like games and animation, stuff like that, right? So most of my work like happens like virtually, like inside like a computer, right? Like building 3D models and animations and like coding and like stuff like that. So it's all like virtual stuff. 2 years ago, like I started teaching and doing like research project at the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, HKAPA, where like I actually encountered like a lot of students like doing like similar sort of stuff that I do, like costumes, characters, props, but like all in like a physical like space, right? So like sometimes students like work on like really interesting, like beautiful like costumes and like props and like stuff like that, working with like really delicate like materials. And I also like encounter like a lot of like really brilliant like actors, actresses, dancers, and stuff like that. I think like the interesting here is that like I used to work on like a lot of these things like virtually, like doing like cloth simulation in animation, making 3D virtual characters, stuff like that. And then now I'm working in an environment that like people like do similar things, but then in the physical world, right? Think about like immersive theater with like mixed reality. Like there are like a lot of projects that do like VR, immersive theater, and things like that, right? And then like how it like normally works is that like the audience on the right have like a VR headset, have a PC backpack, and just like walk around. And in the virtual world, they might see like a virtual character and stuff like that, right? Like the left one, right? And if I think about like virtual like characters, right? I've been in this kind of projects a lot of times, and I think virtual characters in like real-time situations always like the skin kind of looks like plastic, like the expression is like not supernatural and like stuff like that. And I think like those things like work in like video game, but I think in like a performing arts like perspective, there's a lot more that we can work on from like a technical standpoint, from computer graphics standpoint, and stuff like that. But then like when we compare like a virtual character with like a real actor, I come from like a student filmmaking background, so sometimes like I really prefer to work with like a real actors and actresses and stuff like that. So the question like comes to like how do we combine all this like really beautiful like props, like costumes in the physical world, like characters, actors and actresses from the physical world, to combine it with like virtual immersive environments, right? Like a traditional approach is like motion capture, 3D scanning, and stuff like that, but they all turn like physical actors into these sort of like virtual characters. But is there like a more direct way, or is there like some sort of like more alternative way of like combining like both worlds? And that's like what I'm working on right now. So I've been working on this idea of like immersive theater with like mixed reality. And how that works is that we would have like a green screen room, and then we would have like visitors with like MR headsets, right? So MR stands for mixed reality, which I will talk a bit more in a bit. So what they receive through the headset is kind of like, say, like an immersive virtual environment, right? For example, just like a virtual forest. They can like physically walk around the green screen room as if they're walking around inside a virtual forest, okay? So this is like all like super typical, right? But what I'm very interested in experimenting is like to have like live actors and actresses inside the green screen room with like physical props and like costumes, okay? So like the reason that we are using like mixed reality headset is that it has like two like 3D cameras on the headset, okay? I'm very interested in doing like real-time chroma key, okay? So like as the audience is like moving around with the headset and like looking in like different directions, stuff like that, the system will be doing real-time chroma key, like cutting the actress like in real time from the green screen. And then we would like composite that with like virtual environments like in real time, okay? So the front like would be like the live actress, like a live footage, like live action footage in 3D with like the torch and like the textures, like all with like the real physicality and the real texture of the costumes to composite that with like virtual environments, okay? So we don't have to like motion capture it, like it's just like real-time compositing. So I'm very interested in working on this idea of like immersive theater combining virtual environments and like live performance from like real actors, real costumes, real set and props, stuff like that. So some props can be virtual, some can be physical. We can figure out ways to like combine like physical lighting, virtual lighting to like make like seamless alignment and stuff like that. So this is still like a super early stage idea that I've been working on, but I'd like to take advantage of like sort of like talk to just like share ideas and just to see if any like feedback and like stuff like that. Okay, so I've been talking for like quite a while, so I'll just like stop here and I'll just start like talking to Tomasz, taking questions and things like that. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alan, for this interesting presentation. You define yourself as somebody who works with video games. And you say that you make such artistic video games, which are not the usual shooting and this kind of thing.
Right.
What is your experience? Is there any market for such artistic video games? Because those interactive works, what you produce, I've seen in exhibitions and festivals, and of course they work there very well. But if we say video game, then we imagine that people can buy this. What is your experience with that?
I think that's like a fantastic question. So like when I look at like the landscape of like art games, like experimental games, like right now, I think like there are like two ends of the spectrum right now. So like on one end, as like Tomasz like said, like it's like the art games for like the more like fine art industry, right? So like those like the end of that spectrum is like more like for like galleries, like museums, academia, like for like art game presented as an art installations, experimental games, stuff like that. And then I think like the other end of the spectrum like is like the market for like indie games, right? So like it's like more oriented towards like the indie game market, like to be selling on like Steam and like working with game companies and like stuff like that. But I think like there are like a lot of like spaces in between like the two ends of the spectrum that we can like experiment with, and that's where I also encourage my students to do it as well. So I've been mostly focusing on like the more like art like market, but then like 2 years ago I also started selling like in my games like on like Steam, on like interactive market, and it's like very different. Like it takes like a lot of like work in terms of like debugging, because like the games have to work on like all sort of like computers, and you have to work with like publisher to help with like marketing and stuff like that. So it's like very different, but it's also very interesting. But I think like the space in the middle is also very interesting, right? So for example, like 2 weeks ago I was like in Chicago and I was taking like a 14-hour flight, right? It's like super long flight, super boring flight. And then on the flight, like everyone is like looking at like a monitor, right? And then you also have like a computer. And I think like the interactive system on like an airplane is like super underused. And I think like there are like a lot of interesting applications for like art games on like the airplane, because everyone is in like a low oxygen state. Everyone is like emotional because they just leave like family and like stuff like that. I think like on the airplane it's like a really interesting site for like experimentation with like art games, interactive animation, stuff like that. And I think we'd be also looking into like the area of like autonomous cars, stuff like that, when people are like in a car but like not necessarily driving. And I think there are also like a lot of experimentation space with like interactive experience, animation, things like that.
Do you think or do you hope that people wants to do such experiences? Because sometimes it seems to me that people play with games just to to forget their problems or forget all of these experiences. They just want to sort of reset their brain and just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, I think like there's like certainly this notion of like the escapism like associated with like video game, and like they have been there for like decades. But I think like for most of my games, it's like not fun to play. And like sometimes like it's more like the game playing you instead of like you playing the game. So it's like definitely not like a fun experience. But I think like I just have to hope that like there's like an audience for that. And I think like for films, like there are like a lot of films like that, right? Like there's not like a pleasurable experience, but like people enjoy watching it. Like not for like the instant pleasure, but like as like an intellectual experience or as a like creative stimulation and things like that. And I guess as like artists, like I have like no direct control over like what the audience wants and stuff like that. And I think like I just have to hope for it. But I think like that market is like actually like happening. Like I think it's like much more easier for like art gamers, like people who make art games like to financially survive and stuff like that. So I think I'm pretty optimistic about that.
Okay. It's good to hear.
Yeah.
I try to follow this kind of artistic games. Yeah?
Right.
Earlier, much
Yeah.
earlier, were
Yeah.
some games
Yeah.
which were, I don't know, very interesting visually or
Yeah.
abstract, or
Yeah.
try to tell some more complex idea or something.
Right.
And I was always wondering that how many people are interested in this.
Right.
Anyhow, it seems to me that your point of view and your behavior is the behavior of an artist. I mean, you don't want to find what is successful, what the audience wants, but
Right.
you want to show your vision, your unique world, like this memory world, and then if somebody is interested in, he or she can enjoy this.
Right.
Okay. From the other point of view, I'm sorry I'm asking these things because I'm also such a new media artist, and I myself also interested in this question. So when you define yourself as an artist,
Right.
and let's say you go to an exhibition opening when there are lots of artists and curators and so on,
Right.
and when you say that you make computer games, what do you think? The artists, the art world, the curators, do they take you serious, or do they say, it's a gamer guy, it's not really art?
That's like a great question. I would say like working with like art and technology, and I think like it's like pretty common that like you go like into art world that people think like you might be like too like technical and like stuff like that, and like you go into like the technology world, people think like you are like too kind of like too like artistic and like too like not like practical, like not like market oriented and stuff like that. And I think as like artists, like no matter whether you're working with like video games or you're working with like music, like electronic music and stuff like that. Like you have to encounter like this sort of like conversations like all the time. And I think it's like not unique to like the medium of like video game, right? Like you have to like constantly like define yourself within like a really wide spectrum. And I think like it's like interesting to live in this kind of like really ambiguous like spaces like between established like disciplines. And I think like this is why I think like SCM and like MIT schools that like it allows you to like navigate flexibly between these spaces and like not force you to like to be like a certain profession and like, things like that. So I guess like there's like certain kind of training that you in the real world that you have to like just talk to people and like not be scared like to like define yourself and things like that. So I don't have like a fixed formula to like deal with that, but.
Well, I absolutely agree with this. Yeah. I just wanted to hear your opinion, and I think it's a very good position when you are, how can I say, you are not in this or that category. You are somewhere in between. I think it means that you do something which is new and original, and it's not categorized yet. So I absolutely understand this, and it's very close to me. I just wanted to hear your how can I say, experience in this. Any other questions, perhaps?
Yes, this is a very interesting discussion. I'm not an expert in this field by any means, but I wonder also there's a kind of generational logic at work here. I mean, video games, the video game generation now approaching middle age, and so tastes begin to change. So while of course you have games now bigger than movies in terms of the AAA end of things, perhaps also you're going to have a greater diversification of the kind of games that people are interested in. Just as pop music grew older, you got a greater differentiation in taste. And
I feel the same too. And I think like people, I don't think people talk about like art games like right now. To see if it's still like a pretty like niche thing. But I guess like we did some like pretty extensive like research data into like how much money like art games actually make in the market. And I think like there are like a couple of games, like for example this game like Stanley Parable, like which I would call as kind of like an art house game, but also have a bit of like overlapping with like the ENG game like market. It actually makes like a lot of like money. And I think like if you look at like that, like the market, when we look at like the numbers, like I don't like to like take things like from that angle, but I think as like artists, it's like interesting to learn about how you survive and stuff like that. But then when you look at like art house games, like some of them actually like makes like a lot of money, and it's like totally like feasible to like survive as an independent like art game maker. And I think in America, like for example, for like indie films, like most of my friends who are like indie film director, I'm like not an expert, but like just like hearing from friends, like from like indie filmmakers in the States, mostly rely on like state funding and stuff like that. But I guess as like indie game like designers, like you have like a lot more like different channels that you can like receive like funding and stuff like that. And then as Professor Richard mentioned, like we also dealing with like audience who are like more grown up like playing games, like and in different stages of life, like you want like a different sort of like artistic experience, right? And then like, and I think like those people definitely want like deeper, like meaningful, more interesting experience with like games, and that also push like what like indie game makers that can do and pursue and like survive as well, I think.
Yeah, I think what Richard told is interesting, and let me just share my own little story. When I lived in Japan in 2000, of course, I showed my animations to the Japanese students, and then one Japanese student stood up and told that, Tamashii-san, I love your films. It really deeply touched me. It reminded me the time when I was a child and played with Nintendo.
Right.
So, of course, for him, it seems to me that Nintendo was the how can I say, the childhood experience. So for him, games worked on the same way as I would say that in my childhood, this or that television series, defined me very well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like we also like trying to, and I think like there are like a lot of like new forms of like artworks that are made by video game technologies, but are not necessarily like video games, right? Like they are like autonomous simulation as like art forms, like playing like games that play themselves and stuff like that. And I think like that's like a lot of work put into like how do we define those sort of works. There are kind of like games, but like not necessarily games, right? And yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tomasz, and thanks for having me.